Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guests are the team behind the upcoming Man's Best at Boom Studios. It's Jesse Lonergan and Pornsak Pichetshote. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, David.
No, thank you.
Great to have you here.
Oh, you guys nailed it. For listeners who don't know, which is 100% of you, we were talking about how there's a tendency of people running into each other and over talking on one another. And we were talking about how they just know the flow. And you know what? You're the first team that has ever nailed the intro. So I'm so proud of you already. That actually ties into my first question. I did want to ask, we're recording this a little more than 2 weeks before Man's Best hits final order cutoff on February 26th. How is the press push going? Are you enjoying the process of getting hype built for the book?
I never know if I enjoy that. If I enjoy the process. Jesse, do you know?
No, what I like doing is drawing. And so I feel like with Boom, I've been given sort of, I feel they're doing more. They send us videos and stuff, and you can post this on your social media and stuff. So I guess that's nice. It's a lot of podcasts. I think we're doing another one tomorrow. We did one last week.
Are we doing another one tomorrow?
Yeah, we're doing another one tomorrow.
Oh, good to know.
Same time. But I think because for me, it's I get to have conversations with people as opposed to my 2-year-old. It's nice to talk about adult stuff in the middle of the day. Sort of adult stuff, I guess, comic books. But
I actually think by the time the book is done, I finally figured out how to talk about the book. So I feel like it's always this constantly evolving thing of just kind of maybe this is the interview. Well, I finally figured out the best way to sort of talk about the book. And then later I'm maybe next interview will be the interview. I finally figured out the best way to talk about the book.
That is one of the interesting things that I think about this whole process. So, let's say, I don't know how many interviews you're going to end up doing, but let's say that there's 6 podcasts you're going to do between now and FOC or something like that. Every time you do that, you have to explain it again. So you're trying to do your best to not say the same way. So if somebody happens to listen to multiple of them, you're just wow, this guy's just saying the same thing over and over. Also, you get other people's interpretation of it. And so in some ways, that might help you kind of hone in on what people are responding to and the right way to say things and everything like that. And I imagine that kind of helps in some ways.
100%. I'll go even farther where, I'm at that stage now in the process where I just finished the last script, the last sort of rewrites on the script for the last issue. And through the whole process, we're doing lettering rewrites and all that kind of stuff. And hearing what people respond to and how they talk about it helps inform me in terms of this is what the book is about. That stuff they're talking about is what kind of drew me to write this in the first place. And maybe it got lost in my head a little bit, or maybe it's always sort of been there, but not quite as focused in the specific way that comes up in these conversations. So it ends up being a really great way to, remind myself the best way to talk about it, but also just it helps focus, I feel the story as I'm sort of telling it as well. For me, I have this weird thing where the plots of all my books are very much structured and planned out beforehand. But thematically, I'm very much kind of figuring it out as I go. And so, for every book that I do, there's at least one line of dialogue, usually at the end of the book, which is something that I've learned through the course of writing the book. And that's a result of me. The themes of it is something the book is kind of telling me what sort of the themes are. And so doing interviews like this and talking to people like you and getting your feedback makes me look at stuff I've been looking at for a while from a new vantage point. I'm oh yeah, I think this is what the book is about. I think this is what this book is trying to teach me. And so very much all the things you're saying.
Jesse, did you want to add anything?
Nah, people go easy on artists. I feel like people have a harder time talking about art. And so the questions are a little bit softball. It's not they don't worry about the themes. It's I don't know, how'd you draw a cat? And,
oh my God, that was the question I was going to ask first.
I looked at pictures of a cat.
Great. The interview's over.
Yeah, so I'm I did some downloads of some pictures of cats. I had trouble finding enough.
I'm going to go on to my second question because you already took my first question. Jesse.
Oh, is it really? Wait, do you really going to ask me about drawing?
How do you draw dogs so good? That was my second question.
The dogs are a little bit harder. I think all cats look alike.
I was totally kidding. I wasn't actually going to ask you that. Okay. But I mean, it's funny that, cats are kind of balls of fluff, especially Athos. And so
I guess they don't have the variety that dogs have. There's no Great Dane version of a cat. A house cat, as opposed to a Chihuahua version of a cat. They're all they all have the basic. I don't know. Even the big cats, it's
Yeah, I mean, the spectrum is kind of Maine Coon to like there's the Munchkin cats, but even then it's like much smaller than going from like a Chihuahua to like a, I don't know, like you said, a Great Dane or like Saint Bernard or something like that.
Yeah, but also just like their head shape. Like you get the bulldogs, which, you know, have such like a sort of distorted face if you think about what a standard sort of mutt looks like, and just that sort of variety. But yeah, a lot of research on dogs, golden retrievers.
It's really funny to me that I was joking and we actually got a really good answer. Jesse, how dare you be so good at interviews?
I'll try to be worse.
Good. It's always a goal, always a goal. But before we get into Man's Best, I actually want to talk about the origins of this pairing, because I actually find partnerships like yours to be really fascinating, because it's just like, how do these people meet? Like, what's their meet cute? Let's start with you, Pornsak. When did you first become part of the Jesse Lonergan gang? That's our fan club, by the way, Jesse.
I love that. I like to think I was an early adopter into Lonergan gang. I probably wasn't, like, I'm sure like Jesse must have gotten fans from like his newspaper stuff when Hedra was like being serialized, but I came on board, I feel like, when most of the people I know like discovered Jesse stuff was when Hedra was printed over at Image. And the second I saw that, I went nuts over it. The Instagram post is still on my account of just like me going nuts over that book. And then after that, I was just like, anything Jesse was doing, I was going to pick up. This is one of the things I say that embarrasses Jesse. I do believe it is true. Like, and I think you see it when you think Hedra. It is hard for me to think of like being a fan of comics and how comics are told and the language that they use, and not being a fan of Jesse's stuff, because he's so innovative and he does so much interesting stuff with the language of comics. So yeah, to me, this was just like, I don't understand how you like reading comics and don't like reading this. Like, this is just, I was instantly on board.
I also agree. I will say, like, one of the things I really like about Jesse's stuff is that you read a Jesse Lonergan comic and it's almost certain that you've never read a comic that looked like that before.
100%.
Sometimes for a good reason, but most of the time not. But Jesse, how uncomfortable are you that we're just going to be complimenting you relentlessly here for a little bit?
Yeah, pretty uncomfortable.
Okay.
I'm gonna be like, I don't know. It's always weird to just like be complimented. I've been told I'm really bad at taking compliments. Like criticism, no problem, but like compliments, it's like, oh, what am I supposed to do with this?
Yeah, I can't act on this. There's no lesson to be learned from the fact that I'm so handsome.
I just have to sit here and take it.
Jesse, were you familiar with Pornsak's work?
I was. I don't think I had a specific moment like with he described, but I was familiar with his stuff, and the reading The Good Asian, and I felt like I'm more like, I don't read in any sort of sequential chronological order, and it's sort of like I sort of hear something, I buy it, it sits, and eventually I get to it, and whether it's timely or not is very unlikely. So I was familiar with this stuff. I didn't know how long. I guess like I feel like people who pay more attention to the industry know how long he had been an editor and like all the books he'd edited, which was, I knew him as a writer first, which I feel like I missed the boat, like, because I feel like everybody knows him as this editor forever.
I do think that's one of the interesting things about you, Pornsak, and we talked about this when you were on the podcast before, but for listeners that don't know, you were an editor at DC Vertigo before, even as we will discuss, being one of the editors on We 3, the Grant Morrison and Frank Whiteley comic that also is about three animals who with great power and really questionable responsibilities, to be honest. But it is interesting because even if you haven't read his work, you kind of have an idea. It doesn't describe what type of stories you would put out there, but it does kind of get you an idea of the storytelling sensibilities that might kind of speak to you as a person, where you were kind of founded. And so it is interesting to think about those kind of two sides of your career, Pornsak, and just think about how that kind of feeds into where you are now. I'm sure that is, I don't know. It's like you were talking about how if these interviews help you learn, every step of your career has helped you learn and guide you to Man's Best and to Jesse.
Yes, very much so. I think you're exactly right. It's all, you can see sort of my roots and sort of like, I don't know, to me, and of course this feels very natural to me, there's a very strong through line coming from Vertigo to doing all the books that I do. If anything, I think Man's Best might be sort of the biggest curve along that trajectory. But again, not so much when you look at the fact like, oh, I worked on We3 as well. And so there's a little bit of like this connecting that to my old life, even though We3 wasn't as much of an influence or an inspiration as some might think, at least not more so than I have like 4 or 5, like my favorite, like adult animal comics that have all been like major influences. So this is not any more than any of the rest. But yeah, no, I think it's very much the comics that I'm doing now are very much the comics that I tried to do back when I was an editor. When I was an editor, it was me taking, the talents and the interests and the skill set and the experiences of other people to tell those stories. And I think, I'm very much one of those writers that just was like, I started writing because no one else was kind of making the stories I wanted to read as much as, and I was one of the people that was trying to get those people to make those stories. And so for me, writing the stories was just like, oh, these are the things I kind of just want to see. And to me, I'm just filling these holes, but it is very much from the same sort of tradition as from when I was an editor.
Yeah, I do think it's kind of interesting in some ways. I think all the work that both of you have done of late have in some ways felt like they could have been some era of Vertigo book if we were in a different era. It's like The Good Asian for sure. Hedra would have been like maybe like a bit of a reach, but at the same time, I could see it. I don't see it.
My idea of Vertigo is super writer dominant and not particularly arty. Like that was sort of like one of my memories is like, I don't know. I think of Vertigo. I don't even know if the timing's right, but it's like all the British writers like getting their own title at Vertigo is what my dominant impression of Vertigo was.
I believe the agreed upon phrase for that is the British invasion.
That's right.
Right. Is that the term that they use?
I think so.
They was at the time.
I thought you might think I was talking about the Beatles or something. So I was like,
imagine if you're like a music fan, a comics fan, talking about like, do you remember the British invasion? And you're like, yeah, like Alan Moore, Grant Morris. And you're like, I'm talking about the Beatles. What are you talking about? So how did you two first connect? Was it specifically related to putting Man's Best together, or did you connect before that project came to be?
It wasn't, I feel like you described a meet cute. I'm like, oh, we don't really have a meet cute. It's Eric Harburn sent me an email. It's like, I have this project I think you might be a good fit for. And sort of we went from there.
It was a very formal matchmaking.
Yeah. Like it was. It might have even been like all from my website, like a form submission or something of being like, "Are you interested in doing books?" And I was like, "Yes, I do like doing books."
Do you have that check mark on your website?
No, it's just sort of. I feel like I think especially after Hedra, I feel people were like, "Oh, he doesn't." You even said, like, Pornsak has said this to me, and other people have said this to me. It's like, oh, he doesn't work with anyone. And I'm like, I will. It's like, oh, he's probably got, somebody said like a 3-book deal. And I was like, does that exist? Nobody in comics has 3-book deals. And so it was just sort of like, I feel now people maybe are knowing me as like being able to work with other people, maybe. And so I feel like a lot of the things around, I think Eric must have started talking to me late 2022, I think mid 2022 about it or so. Like, I feel like we talked about this a lot and I don't think had gotten down to like really working on it until like last June or so. I feel like we talked for a while. So yeah, it came about through that. And then, Pornsak and I got in touch.
When I think about this book, I really think about just like, this is why creators work. Like, me and Jesse, we both had image books and all that. And I was like, oh, this is really why you work for another publisher and for another editor specifically, because like, I never would have thought to have reached out to Jesse for doing a book, primarily because of what Jesse just said. Like, I just assumed he had better things to do than to work with me. And I literally had a version of that conversation because when Eric mentioned Jesse's name, I'm just like, he must have better things to do. Like, he's writing his own book. Like,
why do people think that?
Your stuff is so singular. So and Eric was the one like, I think he's working with other people. And it's like, yeah, but wouldn't you think he'd want to work on this? It's like, it feels like he'd have better things to do. I think about this a lot because if this was an image book, I honestly don't think I would have the imagination or like honestly the boldness to like reach out to Jesse because I just like, he's probably got some cool ass book that like, is gonna be like 300 pages and like stuff I could never conceive of in a million years. And like, I don't know if he wants to work on this.
You're like, do I really want to ask this incredible auteur if he wants to draw cute things?
No.
And I love the fact that in the press release, a sentence, not to like, apparently we have a lot of preconceived notions about you, Jesse, so I apologize about that. But
I feel I'm very disappointing in person. People like expect like a member Kraftwerk or something to show up in like some formal suit, and it's just like, oh, he's just a guy in a flannel shirt.
I do like that your flannel shirt comes in a grid like you love in your comics too, so that's nice. But I never would have expected in a press release to read you say, I haven't gotten the chance to draw as many cute things as I would like. And yet here we are having a press release where you said that. And I mean, to be honest, like that's the thing. I think we talked about when you were on the podcast last time, Jesse, is just sometimes it's good to have, I don't know, constraints where it's like, and not to act like drawing cute things as a constraint, but sometimes it's good to stretch yourself and to push yourself in areas or directions that you're not really used to because you find yourself as an artist or you push yourself as an artist. And, you know, to be honest, it's like, yeah, sure, you could draw more of the comics that you're kind of known for and write and draw your own stuff. But I bet you learn a lot from every project you take on, like whether it's working with Mike Mignola on Miss Truesdale and the Fall of Hyperborea or working with Pornsak on Man's Best.
Yeah, I mean, and part of the fun of like working with a writer is like, I don't know, I feel like I have my ideas and I like stories go the way they go when I work on them. And it's not the way Pornsak story is going to go. It's not like, but it's also like, I don't think I could write a cute story. Like my inner self would just sort of revolt at a narrative like of that sort. And so like it's like I don't think I could write it. I can draw it, but I can't write it. Like, and so that's sort of like it's good to be able to feel like you can like flex a different muscle or show a different side. And I feel that's like one of the great things about working with writers. And like maybe it ends up getting incorporated into like stuff that's solo, maybe not, I don't know, we'll see. It's always like I feel I have always this debate of like, oh, am I developing a habit now, and is this a good habit that I'm developing? Like I really don't do very finished pencils. Is that a bad habit that I'm developed? Like, is it getting worse and worse? Like, am I just sort of like, you know, like, should I have developed the habit to pencil more? Like, because it changes the way the art works, and is the way the art works the way I want it to work? Like, how much control do I have over what I put down?
I very much relate to what Jesse's talking about, where, especially with this book, like I've had to throw out so many of the tricks I've used on all the other books. And a part of that is really scary. Part of that is exciting because you're learning new things. But there's also this fear of, I don't know, and I don't know if Jesse, if you're like this too, but like on the one hand, there are things that I bring onto every project that I think are important for a story to have. But even as I say that, I have this anxiety of, are those things crutches? And how do I tell the difference? And so there's constantly this give and take of what's a standard and what's a crutch? And like, do I actually know the difference when the time comes?
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes I feel like, especially with like this book, actually, in some of the scenes, it's like, no, you got to do this for real. You need to like do all the perspective lines. Like you need to get your 3 points down, and you're going to measure all this thing out, get the big table, get the big rulers, because I'm a Luddite. And it's like, I know I could fudge it. And sometimes it feels like, oh, am I just fudging everything? Am I just making this up as I go? Like, you know, like, is this what a cat looks like? Or is this what I'm just pretending a cat looks like? And people are accepting it because, I don't know, Garfield looks like a cat. And if Garfield looks like a cat, anything looks like a cat. Like, you know what I mean? Like, where it's just like, I don't know, like knowing what's a crutch, knowing what's a bad habit, I feel can be difficult to tell.
Yeah.
I also think that, like, so you were talking about, you know, having rough pencils, like very unfinished pencils. I'm a big sports guy. And for me, like one of the things I always tell people when it comes to like basketball, which is a sport I used to play a lot and I still play to some degree, is that there's a way you can shoot a basketball that is the kind of optimal way to do it. But that doesn't mean it's the only way you can do it. Like one of the best shooters in the NBA shoots like a crazy person, and he's amazing at it. And like he was drafted lower than he should have been because people are like, is this shot going to work? And for artists, it's like Chris Somney. Chris Somney draws horrible pencils. They're like nonsense pencils. They're just rough shapes that are like, basically looks like a tornado happened on the page. And then what he does is he goes in and he finishes on inks, and they're really tight and they look really good. Then you can also have somebody like Jeff Darrow. Jeff Darrow goes in and his pencils are insane. They're like the tightest pencils that have ever existed. And they're about as far from each other as humanly possible in the production sense. But I think everybody would agree that Jeff Darrow and Chris Samnee are both really good at art. So I guess the ultimate point of my basketball story is there's more than one way to do a certain thing. And I think you're very good at it, even though it may sometimes be like, am I doing this the wrong way? Is this a bad habit?
Yeah, it gets into weird territory of like how much control do I have over it? But it's sort of like this way of doing it is a way that I developed because it worked for me at the time when I had much less time than I do now. And it's like, is this thing called style just a collection of bad habits I built up over the years and stuff? And, like there's sort of like, oh, I don't really need to do that blocking out or whatever. And it's like, would it be better if I did? I don't know, that sort of thing. Like, does my art like signal what I want it to signal to other people? Like for example, you talk about Jeff Darrow and it's this very intricate, very obsessive, like it has its own energy, and it's a very different message than Chris Samnee's art like presents. There's sort of this like fluidness and looseness in Samnee's art that's really not there in Darrow's. And I'm not saying a qualitative thing. It's one is not better than the other. They're just very different. And I feel like Jeff Darrow's art, like the narrative of the story is conveyed so much in just the style in which he's drawing. And then I get in my head of like, does the way I draw actually negatively impact the narrative? Like, and that sort of aspect. I can say positive things about my art, but like that's like one of the things that I sort of worry about. It's like if you're doing some sort of like, I don't know, heartfelt indie comic, but it's drawn in a very slick mainstream style, it doesn't work because it's like there's not enough idiosyncrasy in this for me to believe it's personal. And sort of I sometimes I think because I feel as an artist I'm somewhere in the middle between like really indie and really mainstream. It's like, am I lost in the shuffle? Is it like sort of like, yeah, this isn't what Spider-Man looks like, but it's also not a Fantagraphics book, and sort of like, does it signal clearly, I guess, what it is to other people?
I find those comments fascinating just in general, but also like specifically with Jesse, because like Jesse, you have like this whole, like you have like 4 or 5 other books in like a completely different style, than sort of what you did now. And so it does sort of make me think, like, how much of that style is a conscious choice and how much of that is intuitive, which I feel like I would say naturally for any artist, but specifically for you, who like, it feels like you made with it, probably the page you're on, you've made a conscious choice to sort of change the way that you approach, and I would look at like some of your early books did have that sort of very indie, those comics felt like it was more about immediacy and storytelling than necessarily design and all that. So I'm curious, like when you work on a book now, is it a very different mindset than how you worked on your earlier material?
Yeah, like I feel like I was very narrow-minded in my youth, oddly enough. But I felt like, to me, like, I don't know, like something like Jim Lee, or like, that's like, I like punk rock, and like, that is a lead guitar solo that disgusts me,
right.
And like, if you're talking to me when I'm 23, I'm like, that art is detracting from the story. It's drawing way too much attention to itself. Like, what is even in the story? Like, if you actually pay attention, blah, 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 blah. And all this like sort of like kind of knee-jerk things. And my thing was like, no, it's about the sequence of panels. It's about this imagery. It's Sergei Eisenstein theories of film coming in, and like this sort of like very anti-drawing way of thinking about comics. In hindsight, I just see as kind of dumb. Like, it's like, why are you drawing then? If you have this like, why are you spending all this time to have people not really notice the drawings? Around the time I did Hedra, which was like 2016, and other stuff, it was just sort of like, I kind of felt like that thinking had just cracked, and I was like, I don't care. I'm just gonna make the stuff I want to make and not really worry about it. Even though everything I just said, 5 minutes ago sounds like I worry about it constantly. It's that contradiction that's interesting,
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Looking for the right place to read digital comics? You can find it at Omnibus. Omnibus is a modern digital comic book store and reader app carrying your favorite single issues, volumes, and omnibuses all day and date. It's just like a comic shop where you pay per book, but digital. Omnibus has even upped its game lately, as they've added a web reader in store on top of its iPad version, with iPhone and Android coming soon. Looking for an ideal digital comic store, but with an excellent shopping and reading experience, one that uses novel discovery features to help fans find their next new favorite book, and one that features many of the best comics and publishers in comics today, including publishers like Image, Boom, Dark Horse, and more? You can find all that on Omnibus. Visit the web store or download the app today at omnibus.app. And now, back to the show. Two things I want to bring up. I mean, like, one thing is there's a reason why I can point to people like Chris Samnee and Jeff Darrow and speak about them specifically, and it's because, like, when you think of them, you think of their art and you know what it is because it's them. It's not Chris Samnee. Like, you could say, oh, Alex Toth isn't there, and you could say with Jeff Darrow, well, I don't know what the hell you would even say for Jeff Darrow. Yeah. But for you, it's like I can point to you and I'm just like, it's just Jesse. For writers, it can be difficult to, like, be pigeonholed, I think, because it's just like, unless you're Ed Brubaker and you just do crime books and you're just unbelievable every time. But for you, it's like, people can say Jesse Lonergan, they're not going to be like, oh, he's like from the Jim Lee school or he's from this school. They're just like, it's just Jesse. And I actually think that it's an advantage to you. But let's actually talk about this through the prism of Man's Best, which I'm going to introduce really quick. It's the Boom series that launches sort of on February 21st with an ash can of the first issue, but then the first full issue arrives on March 20th. It's from you two and letterer Jeff Powell, who does a really good job, I do want to say. Anyways, here's the breakdown of what it is. Homeward bound on an alien world, Man's Best follows three emotional support pets living on the Starship Horizon, a spacecraft searching for a new home to house a humanity compromised by bad decisions and corporate greed. I wanted to ask about how you two are working together because in the back of the first issue, Pornsak, you wrote a letter to readers, and in it you described Jesse as being more than just the book's artist, saying he was offering feedback and suggestions throughout the process of the story and script's creation. And I think that's interesting because it's like quite often us readers are just like, Pornsak writer, Jesse artist, and never the twain shall meet. That's just how it works. But it's not really how it works. And like, Jesse is a storyteller, so it makes sense that he would have perspective on how things should be approached. What was different about working with Jesse than, you know, previous collaborations you've taken on? Is it just about how Jesse approaches story?
Everything is different. Everything is, and it's one of the things I really like about this process. Again, these interviews are designed so I can embarrass Jesse as much as
yes, let's do possible.
It. If you write any comic, you're going to learn more about writing comics and making comics from the art of making a comic. Doing a Jesse Lonergan comic, I want to get the most Jesse Lonergan I can out of that Jesse Lonergan comic. And if I feel like I left any Jesse Lonergan on the table, I'm going to look back and regret it. So much of that, I wrote this comic differently than I write any other comic. And we could get super like sort of in the weeds about that. It's something that we talked about, me and Jesse talked about early on. And it's not something like he was very easygoing, just like, yeah, whatever you want to do. But I was like, no. So I'm going to give, every page is going to have it at the max 5 panels. I'm never going to put more than 5 panels. An action sequence is going to have 4. And, you know, I'll fluctuate sort of between there. But then from there, feel free to do sort of whatever you want. But then like the really cool thing and the fun thing about working with it is that, again, working with Jesse, I honestly feel like I understand more about comics. Like, one of the things that kind of clicked on me, and as we were saying, like the things that things that crystallize where, as you're doing these podcast interviews, and again, this is a bit where I'm gonna embarrass Jesse, but I actually honestly think that Jesse's comics are the closest thing comics have to music. I honestly do, because there's a rhythm to them. All his comics work with a rhythm. And one of the things, again, like having gone through it now and having sort of been talking about it, one of the things that me and Jesse talk about is like, it's not that Jesse won't do a splash page, but it's like if you give him the opportunity to just a splash page, he'll throw in a ton more panels on there. But one of the things I realized as I'm talking to it's because of the musicality of his comics, because a bunch of splashes actually disrupts the rhythm of his comics. And there is a constant sense of movement that happens. Like, one of the things I think is super interesting, a very early just thing that Jesse said early on was just like, oh, I got to figure out like what grid this comic is going to have. And like, you know, just like how many panels. And like when I think about it, it's like, oh yeah, because like that's the tempo in which he's telling this story. And I actually don't know how he chose this particular grid over any other grid for this particular comic. But just like little things like that of looking at a comic, like, you know, I changed the way I work for it. And again, so a big part of the process is just like Jesse brings a very unique and specific set of skills to any project that he's on. So how can I make the most out of that in this particular thing? So a lot of that was, you know, whether it's in the conception stages, like, you know, saying like, you know, this is what it is. Give me your notes, give me your feedback. One of the things I did for this project was I gave like a pretty extensive, I don't even know if it was an outline, somewhere between an outline and a Bible of just like what the whole series was, as well as like this is the subtext I'm trying to get. These are the themes I think I'm going to try to get, all that sort of stuff, and just give it over to Jesse and just have him sort of give feedback on all that sort of stuff and try, as much as I could to kind of make it a conversation where he tells me what he thinks about these sort of things. I'm like, okay, but I get what you're saying, but actually what I'm trying to go for is this. And that happens sort of all through the script stage. And I don't usually work like this with comics. Like I like to think I leave a lot of collaboration, but it is not so much, I feel like, from the very conception stage, being like, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? All right, let me see how I can incorporate some of that into sort of how I'm doing it. And that's been very much sort of the process of working on this book. And it is, for me, just like, I want to be able to really tap into all the different ways. Again, Jesse's comics are very, very unique, and I want to really take advantage of that as much as I can. And so much of the process, I'm experimenting, I'm changing around with, to trying to get as much of that as I can. And I'm learning a ton just about comics in general in the process.
Yeah. Jesse, also your glasses make your eyes pop in a really amazing way. So
yeah.
I do think it's funny you said maximum 5 panels and the first page is 13 panels.
Yeah.
Well, I always add panels. If it's written as 5 and it becomes 13, I'm like, yeah, okay. But if it's written as 9, it's like, oh, this is going to become 30. Like,
it's really a multiplier, to be honest.
Yeah. And so I feel like, it's sort of that decision, like, to do that isn't really like a limit. Like, it's sort of just leaving space, like, oh, if it's 5 panels, like, you have space to do something. Like it's that whole like give and take back and forth sort of thing. It just leaves room for stuff that maybe is like more graphic or something.
I love the first page because of how it builds up to the reveal of like a cat in a mech suit. And this, it gets you an understanding as to like what's going into this simulation that they're in. And it actually, it reminds me of Faster, and like in how you would kind of get into like the mechanics of the cars and everything like that with the grid and everything. And it'd help you understand that. That stuff is really great. I mean, one of the things I really appreciate about this comic is there can be a severe downside to the, for lack of a better word, arranged marriage approach to comics, where it's like, you two have never met or talked. You two are working together now. Good luck. That can not always work out. But in a very specific way, this feels like a very balanced look between what a Pornsak comic is and what a Jesse comic is, and it optimizes both into one space, which is not always easy to do. So clearly, good job by the two of you.
Thank you. That's a huge compliment. I will happily take that.
Jesse, have you found that, so like, last year I mentioned you did Miss Truesdale and the Fall of Hyperborea with Mike Mignola and Dave Stewart.
Yeah.
That is a universe that is very much defined by its visuals in a lot of ways, but also it's defined by visuals that typically are not Jesse Lonergan visuals. And I mean that in like, Guy Davis does not draw like you. Duncan Fegredo does not draw like you. He doesn't tell stories like you. How has the process of going through that been for you? Have you found that experience to be a positive one, like taking part in other stories and collaborative works that are, you have to operate slightly differently?
All of that, like what you said, is definitely real, but it's also like all in my head. Like
it doesn't have to be different.
Well, yeah, but like Mignola didn't say like anything. Like he was just like, just do your thing, and like, and me worrying about like, well, this universe has been established. There's this way that things look, blah blah blah. All of that is like me bringing it in sort of my head, but it's also sort of like in some ways as like a person who's like a fan of stuff, it's like kind of cool. It's like, oh, I can do something that's like, yeah, that looks like a Mignola thing. Like, where if I were doing it on my own, I'd be like, people would look at that and be like, too Mignola.
Yeah.
Or something. Like, it's like, I like Jim Lee, but I'm never going to do like a Jim Lee like splash page because it's too Jim Lee. Like, it's not my thing. And sort of like, I felt like with that, it's like, oh, I get to like kind of, because Dave Stewart didn't actually do the colors. I did all the colors, but it's like I get to use, like more of a Dave Stewart palette and like look at sort of more of that style, which I don't know that I would feel comfortable doing on my own.
I mean, clearly it worked given the fact that I've read so many Mignolaverse comics that are colored by Dave Stewart that I was like, Dave Stewart's still coloring this very obviously. So good job, Jesse. This is me sharing a theory. I wrote you up as one of my creators of 2023. So this is by no means me being like, Jesse, you fucked up. But reading that series, it kind of felt like it took a couple issues for you to get fully comfortable to be yourself.
Oh, definitely.
From the issue 4, you were unleashed, it really felt like.
Yeah, Mike Mignola's intimidating. And it's not him as a person. It's just like, he is someone who like revered, like, and it's like, he's great, he's wonderful, he's super nice, but it's like, oh, I gotta do this really good. And like that sort of like stress in your head. Like I gave myself like a week to do the first page because I knew I was going to redraw it. I drew it once, like, nope, draw it again. And like, if I had the opportunity now, I would draw it again. Yeah, there's definitely like that sort of like balancing that. And then just getting comfortable, like, and not really like any specific way of just sort of like, okay, I feel comfortable with this. I think also possibly like issue 4, like really sort of narratively leans into things that are kind of very much like multiple time periods happening at once, like really sort of pushing the sort of graphic way of thinking about like time and space. That's good for me.
Do you feel like when you took on Man's Best and you're working with Pornsak that you didn't have, like, because you went through that with Mike, that you were able to collaborate a little bit more openly and didn't necessarily have the same thing in your head because of that on Man's Best?
I think also like, having done that and like sort of, I feel like Pornsak said, no, he didn't know who I was in 2020. You didn't know who I was in 2020. And so like, I didn't know who I was in 2020. Like working with other people is something I very much have to learn how to do, because it's just like I was like a weirdo indie guy, like just doing my own thing. And now it's like, oh, you're working with people, and I have these ideas of what a comic looks like in my head. And I'm like, oh, they probably want me to do that thing that I think what they think, like this sort of like weird brain freeze thing that I had to work through. And so like, I think the longer I do it, the easier it is just to be myself and just sort of like work comfortably. And so like, I think it wasn't as much of an issue with this because I'd already done those other things. It's like, I don't know, like, if I get asked to do like a comic book cover, I have this idea of what the editor thinks the comic book cover should look like before they ask me.
Yeah.
And that if I give them this like thing with like 50 panels on it, they're going to hate it because comic book covers don't have panels on them. And for me to be like, here's 50, like they're going to, there's that self-rejection that goes on that I had to sort of stop turning that off and just be like, I'll let them reject me and just do my own thing. And if I do something really off base, they can tell me.
That's an interesting thing just because, and not to diminish what you've gone through, but it's just like everyone does that to some degree. I mean, Pornsak, I'm sure, The Good Asian was a big hit and it was a really, really renowned book. And I mean, Infidel like won awards too. It was like both of them were really like successful books. And like to some degree, somebody seeing that you were doing a cute animal comic that's homeward bound in space, they'd probably be like, what the shit are you doing, man? Like, what is this? But at the same time, like in the back of the book, you talk about how it's the most personal comic you've ever written. And I do think it's interesting where like sometimes the preconceived notions about what something might be might not actually be reflective of what it proves to be. Because like, Jesse, this book very much is you, and it's abundantly clear that it's very you as well, Pornsak.
Oh, thank you. I honestly, I really, really appreciate that, because I don't think it's something most people sort of catch on, but it's something I really worked hard of. It's like, I really wanted, this book is going to be me because I don't know how not to make it be me, but I also really wanted it to be Jesse too. So the fact that you're acknowledging that it's kind of both of us, and that really makes me really, really happy. So much about this book was different for me. And like, it was the most personal book that I've done, which is strange for me to say. I saw this interview, I think there was a Hollywood roundtable where there are a bunch of lead actors, and I think Jeffrey Wright was talking about how he chose to be in American fiction. And he was just like, you don't think about like the things that actually make you want to take a role are the simplest things that nobody would ever think about. It's like, yes, American fiction, there's all this stuff happening in American fiction. But honestly, I want to do that movie because it was about a guy who was struggling with issues with his mother and trying to take care of his family. And I was going through that. And to a lot of people, that is not the flashy thing about the movie. But as soon as I saw that, I knew I had to kind of do that movie. And I kind of feel like for me, it's with this, it's just like, it's a lot of times it's the subtle stuff that is like, oh, I just kind of had to write this story. Like this book for me, it was very much about it's Homeward Bound in space, and much like Homeward Bound, it's about friendship. But specifically for me, it was updating those ideas of like what does friendship look like in these very contentious times that we're living in right now, and how does crisis sort of affect friendship, and us coming through a couple of years of crisis, and some might argue still going through it. Like I've gone through things with sort of my friendships with people, and I think I mentioned it in that editorial that you're talking about, where I've never written things in my books in the past with all the books I've done. People give me a lot of credit by saying that they're sort of very personal books, and they are, but they're personal for me in a sense of it's a perspective that I have that comes from living as a person I've been living from, a certain amount of time. I know writers who do things, and the things that they do show up in their work, and I'm not one of those writers. But the closest thing that's happened to has been this book, where it's just like, oh, these scenes here, I know the exact moment in my life where I said a version of this, I thought a version of this, I came across this realization. And even though it's about, a ragdoll cat in a mech suit and a bionic golden retriever and a bulldog with a rocket strapped to his back, like it's weird. And I've never had this experience before, where I'll look at a scene and I'll know where I was in my life when I thought those things before it got onto the page.
Interesting.
And that's never happened to me before. And it's been a really interesting experience. And it's something like I definitely kind of want to like, okay, with it, as I move forward, how do I sort of expand on that? How do I get into that a little bit more? And it is all in this book about talking animals in space.
I mean, not to spoil the last page, but this is like narration from it. And I feel like this in a lot of ways is kind of, I don't want to say like it's kind of the heart of the story. There's a narration that says, because sure, things look so bad and we were so little, but that didn't mean we don't count, right? In like a lot of ways, I feel like that's the heart of the book, because it's, it's us. It's us in this world where it's just like, do I matter when like literally nothing I can do can change what 2024 is going to be like for the world. But do I do nothing or do I do something? And the choice is always something. Whether I am me or I'm a ragdoll cat or a dog with a rocket that like absolutely bewilders me, I feel like this is a very dangerous position for Lovey. That, it's just like you got to do what you can. Did you have specific ideas, Pornsak, for what these animals would look like? Or are you just like, Jesse, I just want this dog to fly, and he's like, got a rocket for you?
I know Lovey specifically that Jesse was very heavily that was
he was pro rocket
heavily at Jesse. He was pro rocket. He was pro bulldog. He wasn't originally a bulldog.
Yeah, I think it was a Jack Russell, but I don't know. I've said that before, that I think it was a Jack Russell, but it might have been something else. I like the idea of an ugly dog. Like we can say whatever, but like French bulldogs, all the bulldogs, like it's kind of like, oh, it's so adorable, kind of like in this alternate reality sort of way. It's like, wow, it's really ugly and weird and gross, and it can't breathe right, and it's drooly. I love it. And I wanted to do that. My dad had a French bulldog, and the French bulldog actually did have like the heart in the middle of its forehead as well. So I thought it would be nice to be able to get that dog into the story. I think with the Rocket Pack, that might have been a little bit of a testing on my part, because like I said, like, opportunity to be cute and sort of like silly and weird. And I was like, I'm going to put a really big Rocket Pack on this and like send it to Pornsak and Eric Harbour and see if they go for it. Because like, it's that sort of like, don't self-project yourself. Don't draw the more realistic Rocket Pack, because we are talking about a Rocket Pack on a dog. So how realistic does it need to be?
Wait, really quick. My favorite part about it is it's not just a jetpack, but it looks like he's basically got a missile attached to his back where it's just going to launch him.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The guns pop out of it as well. Yeah, I wanted it to be big and sort of like, I feel it sets a certain tone of just like what is possible to be seen going forward, because like, like with the story, Pornsak is sort of like running through all these different biomes, like narratively, and it's like it kind of gets really weird, like it kind of goes all over the place. And I felt like, at least with one of their designs, if not all of them, I wanted to like push it, so it's like it's gonna get kind of weird. Issue 3 especially, I think, might hit max weirdness. But yeah, so I think all the functions Pornsak had, all the functions I think were there. Like it was cat in a mech suit, some sort of force field thing for the golden retriever. I think those were all there. I don't think that was something we discussed. It's hard to remember now. It was like a year ago.
I know. It's really tough to remember. Like I do specifically remember. I must have said some version of cat in a mech suit or something like that. But I do remember the exact moment where it's like, oh, me and Jesse are totally on board the same book. When the mech suit came back and there were ears on the mech suit, I'm like, yes, we are totally working on the same book. When that mech suit came back and there were cat ears on the cat mech, like, yes, this is it.
I love it.
Yeah.
I did want to ask about the three leads. So it's Athos, Porthos, and Lovey. And I just want to say two things involving the names. One, you have implied the existence of either a D'Artagnan or a Dovey in this universe. So I'm very excited to see what we're going to find. And also, I do appreciate that you addressed the great issue in the room, which is that Aramis was not involved, and the doctor who they're trying to go and rescue in the book is like, I just had to name him Lovey because he's so lovey, and I'm like, that's legit. Okay, I appreciate that because I was about to riot at first. But why were a trio of pets the right gateway to the story rather than humans?
Oh God, I don't know if I ever considered humans for this story.
Good.
I think partly because, again, going back to sort of what you were saying at the last page, so much of this book is about just like, it's about feeling small and insignificant, where it just feels like there's all this stuff that is happening that is completely outside of our control. And what do we do in the face of it? And how do we take care of the people that we love? And how do we build relationships and stay close to the people that we love? And so animals made just more, not just animals, but like, domestic animals just made so much sense for that. Like, I don't think there was any other way that it was always animals. And I think part of the Homeward Bound sort of inspiration is like, well, it's got to be like, two dogs and a cat, because like it's the Homeward Bound of it all. Like, I know early on, me and Jesse was trying to convince me to like, can one of those sort of like be a bird or something like that? And my anal retentive right brain is just like, but the bird can fly faster, so that like than the animal. So then like is he always circling? And like I honestly, my brain just couldn't like get over like, but the bird can fly everywhere. Why would he hang out with these guys?
Yeah,
is he
I'm
always
out of here.
Constantly circling back? So I was just kind of So I was kind of like my brain just couldn't like do that math. So I'm just like, no, let's just keep it up a little. Maybe it's a different dog or whatever the case may be. But for me, it was always like working off that sort of Homeward Bound sort of archetype, and then just sort of updating it. Like, I really do like when I look at something like Homeward Bound, and it's so much about friendship, and I really do sort of seeing as like kind of updating those ideas of friendships for kind of like the era that we're in right now.
I think also sort of like I was not part of like that part of the process because it was already animals and it came to me. But like by using animals, I feel like if it's three people, like the audience, the readers will like pick sides. Like, and I feel like, like it all of a sudden it'll become like these dichotomies that I feel this story is sort of like going above. Like, it's like, well, we're not really like getting bogged down in that. And by having it like three animals, I sort of feel like you take them at face value. Like, I don't know that like a reader is going to be like, man, I hate that French bulldog. Like, I mean, maybe some of them will, I don't know. They might have had bad experiences or something, but like, I feel it's like in movies, like 1 million people die in a movie, but that dog, like, and like, I'll be very upset if the dog dies.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, oh, the whole team died. That's okay. As long as the dog makes it through. Just like the beginning of Alien 3, it's like, you killed the dog. Like,
you're done, Fincher.
I'm not a fan of this movie.
I'm out.
It's like John Wick. I mean, it's like his wife dies, and you're just like, oh, that's sad. And they're like, the dog dies. He's like, go and kill all of the Russian mafia. I support this. And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. 2024 crowdfunding continues to roll on with Zoop. Now live is the career-spanning compendium by Bob Fingerman, with projects launching soon by Harley Quinn's Chad Harden, 2000 AD's Jimmy Broxton, DC Comics' Chris Weston, and Prodigy Nir Levy. When Zoop says there are more surprises in store, they mean it. This month is going to unveil a first in the crowdfunding space. To take part in all the fun, it takes less than 30 seconds to create an account. The e-commerce style checkout is easy and intuitive. You can add multiple rewards and add-ons into your cart, provide some info during checkout, and you're done. No confusing additional steps in finalizing your pledge, and no post-campaign surveys. And of course, every creator appreciates your support. For creators looking to crowdfund your project, Zoop is currently open for submissions. Email them at hellowearezoop.com to start a campaign. And now, back to the show. I did want to talk about pets as leads because I find that to be such a fascinating road. It's like a really quick and easy way to get readers invested in the story. But also it's like what you're saying with Lovey. It's like, I think if it was a human, you'd just be like, this guy just seems like a jerk. But that argument between Lovey and Porthos in the middle of the book, it really helps us understand their view of the world and their view of humans and their relationship with each other. And like, you wouldn't have the baggage that comes with like how we feel about these people, because you care about these animals and you care about both of their perspectives because they're animals. But then like the flip side, it's also dangerous because, to bring up another movie, a much worse movie than Alien 3 is the Idris Elba and Kate Winslet movie, The Mountain Between Us. Are you two aware of this?
Wow.
Yeah.
I am aware of it, but I don't know anyone who's seen it. So I haven't
seen it either. I haven't seen it either. I have a very specific reason to bring it up. Okay. So that movie was announced. It was like a plane crash movie where it's Kate Winslet and Idris Elba and a pilot and a dog crash in the plane. And all the social media response was people being like, oh my God, is the dog going to die? It was so significant that this completely forgettable movie, the only reason why I remembered it is because they created a trailer that straight up said that the dog from this movie lives. They spoiled their own movie out of fear of people not turning out for that one reason.
Fantastic.
There's like the really impactful dramatic side, but then there's also the dangerous side of you're going to have people like crazy invested in these characters where it's like, if Athos dies, I may riot, personally speaking. How do you balance that? The need to create credible drama, but also in knowing that people will riot? Or is that not something you can even think of because you just have to create credible drama no matter what?
I think you have to create credible drama no matter what. Because I think, too, like the other challenge with something like this, as opposed to a Homeward Bound or whatnot, is we're serializing this, too. So there needs to be dramatic stakes to just keep people sort of coming. There is a little bit of like, does everyone make it out? If everyone makes it out, do they make it out in the way you think they're going to make it out? How, like, you know, there's all these sort of questions that sort of come up that you kind of have to balance in there. But in a certain sense, you do just kind of hope you've got to, you know, put everyone in peril. There has to be some serious consequences of that peril. And you've got to hope that the audience doesn't string you up when they see what the consequences are.
There's another thing that you did that was really smart in the book. So I'm investing in the characters from the start. Then the characters are off to try to, let's say, rescue people. I'm not going to get into specifics because it's first issue. But you also, because you're geniuses, introduced a MacGuffin, the don't touch. Yes. I want to know what the don't touch is, guys. It could be anything. It could be a bigger dog. It could be a missile. I don't even know. Whatever it's going to be. I'm excited to find out what the don't touch is. Smart work by you two. I like it.
I think I can safely say no one will guess what the don't touch is.
You're going to now make me create an Excel spreadsheet that is just thousands of ideas. Just be like, I knew it, Pornsak. Look at this. Cell A 1923.
Yeah.
So going back to, obviously this book wouldn't exist without Eric Harburn because he is the arranger of the arranged marriage. But your most recent original ideas in comics were released at Image and Dark Horse. I mean, I guess not original. It was like the Miss Truesdale book was you working in the Mignolaverse, Jesse. But still, yeah. Boom was not something a publisher I think either of you had worked with before. Why was Boom the right fit for this story instead of, you know, those publishers or any other house?
For me, it was honestly like I had owed Eric a favor for like years and years and years. Like I promised Eric I was going to work for him at some point. He was like the first editor to reach out after Infidel. Like I don't even know if the first issue of Infidel had even come out yet. Like he was just like, I really want to work with you. I'm like, you're basing this on like so little. And again, at a very early stage in my career, I was just like, where I didn't think anyone wanted to work with me. He was just like, I want to work with you on something. And for years, he just was like, he would stay and he'd be like, here's what I'm working on now, just in case if you ever want to be a part of this. And I was like, I know what you're working on because it's like all the biggest books at Boom that everyone is talking about. Like I've read the latest Grant Morrison book. I read some of these Kill the Jonah. Like you don't have to present these comics to me as if there's something I've never heard of. But because very early on, like he had such, you know, he's such like faith and enthusiasm for what I was doing at a time where I don't think I was really showing anything to merit that faith and enthusiasm. And I I promised him early on that I was just kind of like, no, we are absolutely going to work together on something. I really appreciate this. And as an editor, I know that people say that stuff all the time and they never follow through on it. And so and primarily because of that, I wanted to follow through. But the other aspect of this was I had the idea for it, and it was the first time. Most of the time when I have an idea for a comic, I know exactly how it's going to look. I might not know the exact artist but I know the aesthetic it's going to have and all that kind of stuff. I didn't really have it for Man's Best. The closest what I had for it was something that looked a lot like, because the idea had been kicking around in my head for a while. It looked a lot like Stray Dogs. And then Stray Dogs came out. And I'm just like, well, it can't look like that anymore because it's not going to be as good as Stray Dogs. So like back to the drawing board, I don't know what to do with this. And so when I sent, it became like, I promised Eric for a while that we were going to work together on something. I really wanted to keep that promise. I had this pitch, which I was just at a blank. I didn't know what it was supposed to look like. And so then I gave it to Eric, and Eric was the one who thought of Jesse and kind of like and honestly, like he's been such an enormous part. I think that personal aspect that I'm talking about with the book, like I think that definitely came. I think it would have been there regardless. I don't think it would have been as acute or as gone as deep if it wasn't for Eric, who really at every stage kind of challenged me to go deeper into, like, he knew there were bigger ambitions to sort of the story I wanted to tell. And he kind of always like kept me honest and put my feet to the fire, but like, no, you can go deeper into this. Like, what's this about? And he really, and the book is a much, much better book and a much deeper book because of him. And again, like I never would have thought to approach Jesse if it wasn't for Eric. Like so much, this book in so many ways would not have existed without Eric Harburn.
Yeah. Jesse, did you, when it comes to the covers, I know like Boom has its own design team and everything like that, but I love the covers. I think it's really smart that you guys got Trish Forstner, or whoever got Trish Forstner from Stray Dogs to do a variant cover, because Stray Dogs is a genre twinsy in some ways. I think you used the word petsploitation on Twitter, Pornsak, which I took great umbrage at, but it totally is a thing that exists, I'm sure. But Jesse, did you have any part in the design of the cover? Because it's not 50 panels and grids and stuff like that, but you got 9 on there, and it looks very Jesse.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact process, but I think I just asked. It's like, is it okay if I just do like panels on the cover, like treat it as like one image, but like it'll have panels and be broken up, and said something incoherent, and they were like, sure. And so like I feel, I don't know, it's almost like for me, like panels. I had this discussion on it some other time where like someone was talking about like cover artists wanting to become interior artists and like this struggle to make that transition. And for me, I'm like, oh no, totally the other direction. Like, give me 5 panels. I will totally have a great time with that. It's like, you just need to draw one image. I'm like, what? That's impossible. Like how that's like one drum beat. Like no, like that's no, I need something to like, I don't know, to match my idiosyncrasies or whatever. And so like, I think I just did it for the first one. I don't know if it was going to be all of them, but then it became like, oh, could you also do a variant that sort of like switches the cover? So it's kind of the same, but kind of different at the same time.
I like that. And
sort of once that was established with like the first one, it's like, okay, all of them are going to be on the grid in some shape or form. And to be able to have that switch of like, it looks like this, it looks like that.
Were you involved with the broader cover design though? Because in a lot of ways, it's very clean in the way that your covers tend to be. Like I look at that and I just kind of feel like whoever designed it, if it wasn't you, was definitely thinking of you in the process.
I mean, I did put this grid on the cover.
No. I mean, like the Man's Best with like the treatment and
that was all Jeff.
Okay, that's Jeff Powell.
Yeah,
did all that sort of stuff. Really great. Just like, like this beautiful font, like that. Like I don't know. I just think it looks perfect. I love the covers. Like even the things like the 001, 002, like that. The 2 zeros there. I'm like, oh, that's great. And as far as I know, that's all Jeff.
Yeah. I talked to Jeff a little bit about it, just because I'm always talking to Jeff because we work together all the time. And he was sort of saying like, which me being being just dumb, like I don't think I would have noticed it myself, but like he was like very much like, oh, I want the logo to work within Jesse's grid and all that kind of stuff. And then when he mentioned like, oh yeah, it does work within Jesse's grid. Like I just think Jeff's great.
Like we met at New York Comic Con and we just sort of like, we're talking about like panel border line weight versus like word balloon line weight and all I like kind of this sort of like geeky design aspect. And so like I feel he's sort of like a perfect fit. I feel like I can be a troublesome person for a letter sometimes, especially based on a script, because it's like, Pornsak wrote 5 panels and Jesse gave me 14. Where are these word balloons for panel 1 supposed to be? Like,
we'll get there, Pornsak.
There is no panel 1 didn't get done. It's like, you know, it's sort of like, so like, but what he's done has just been fantastic. It really just looks better than I could have hoped.
It's very striking. I love how clean it is. I love how the information just is laid out in like such a smart way, and it just pops because it's got the first one that you did has the white background, and then like the flip side being black is just, I don't know. It's really smart design. But we did talk about in the beginning one thing that Boom helps with, which was you were talking about how they're kind of helping with the promotion. You had the trailer drop this week, which Pornsak, I know you were very impressed by. I bet that's kind of interesting. I don't know if you've ever had your art animated from a comic, Jesse, but like it's definitely.
Yeah, I was kind of like, how did they do that? Somebody did a lot of work.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. You didn't do it, did you?
No, not me at all. I really have no idea how they did that.
I thought you were being coy about your skills again. I was like, Jesse, you animated this whole thing, didn't you?
No.
So they did that, and then they also have that ash can that's hitting right before Comics Pro's annual meeting, which you'll be at. How do you feel like Boom has helped with the promotional side? Because like that's one of the things I feel like a lot of people go to Boom for is just like promotion, like especially in this day and age, is a huge pain. It's really hard to do. It's really hard to get the word out, and Boom is very good at creating a hit through its promotional approach. Is that something you've really appreciated in this process? Is like a little bit more assistance on that side of the thing?
Definitely. I mean, I definitely think part of the unintended upside, I think for me of working with Boom too, is just like, oh, wow. It's something I don't think I realized until I was there. It's like, oh, wow, I kind of get to see how they make comics. Like I kind of get to like, you know, from the outside looking in, like, yeah, they put out all these books. They seem to get sort of all this, you know, this buzz and attention. But it wasn't until there. It's like, oh, I guess I have this like seat, a front row seat into sort of how this sort of happens and how they do that and all that kind of stuff. And so in a way, I'm still along that ride of trying to figure out like, oh, is this how they did this here and they this there and they dropped an ash can here for the thing. And so it's been really, really, really educational and on all that sort of stuff. And I absolutely am the intention is to take away as many tricks as I can as I bring them to other books, because it's been fascinating to watch how they work with all this stuff.
It's like a world I really don't know. And like to be able to talk with people who do know, it's great. Like, you know, I feel like working on other stuff, it's kind of felt like a little bit like I was in the dark. Like, I don't know. Like probably I could ask Image to do an ash can maybe, but like, I don't know to ask them to like, I don't even know how that works, you know, and sort of like to be with people that's like, we know how this works. It's always comforting, you know, like that person's like, I can do this.
Right. I mean, that's the idea is they have the team that kind of comes to you and offers these ideas, as opposed to like with Image, where it's like, understandably, it's kind of self-guided, where you're like,
yeah,
I know people who have done ash cans for their comics, and it's something that they went to Image with rather than like, you know, Boom's marketing team was just like, what if we did this? What if we made a trailer? And you're like, go to town. I have literally no idea how to do that.
Yeah. I also feel too that like I feel kind of isolated from. I think a lot of people that I think we take it for granted that like most people with Image books have like 2 or 3 or 4 Marvel and DC books or some other books. So they're seeing a lot of this ecosystem of like marketing and all this kind of stuff. I put out like 1 book a year, and it's usually through Image. So I don't have access to, I think, a lot of the osmosis that I think a lot of comics creators take for granted in terms of just like, oh yeah, these are how all the other books in the industry is marketed. So a lot of times when I'm there, I'm just like, what's everybody doing? And my information is usually like a year or 2 old, and I'm just trying to like bang my head against the wall until I can figure out something that makes a little bit of noise. So it's been really interesting watching people who, you know, are in the kind of are, you know, in the practice of doing all this sort of stuff.
So I just did this year-long interview series with James Tynion IV, where I talked to him every month about a different subject. And like one of the things we talked about was the publishers he works with. And part of the reason why he works with so many is the exact thing you're talking about, where it's like, it's getting a better idea as to what everyone offers depending on the project you take on. Like, you know, weighing your options, like, you know, rights, you know, promotional stuff, editorial support, this, that. It gets you a better idea. But I mean, you know, even though you're only taking on 1 project a year, and Jesse, I don't know what your max capacity is, but it's like probably like 1 or 2 a year, it seems. goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where it's just no matter what you're doing, you're always learning from this stuff and you're always carrying that stuff forward with you. Whether it's, how do I want to talk about this in a podcast interview, or how will I carry what I've learned from the promotional stuff onto my future projects at other publishers or ones that I do myself or whatever. You're always learning.
Totally. Yeah. It's been great it's been great. I'd be very curious to sort of, I think everyone's envious of the position that James is in. But another aspect to be envious of the position that James is in is to have the vantage point of being able to compare between all the different places and sort of say like, oh, this is what Dark Horse does. This is what Image does. This is what Boom does. That sounds like such a rich amount of information to have at your fingertips.
Also, a shitload of writing. So much writing.
Yeah, so much writing. I don't know how he does it.
If only artists could draw faster so that they could.
Jesse, that's how you could really differentiate yourself, is draw like 7 titles at once. You would really
get on that Kirby pace or that 80s John Byrne pace or whatever. Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen.
No.
But it's I also just sort of feel like with that, it's like, I feel like only a writer can do that. Like, just because it's like, I feel if you did a book at Boom 2 years ago and you're doing a book at Boom now, it's like, about the same. Like, and I feel that at any company, like, it's like, oh, things will have changed, that the people at the company will have changed, our world will have changed, like, I feel the attitude publishers had in 2021 versus the attitude publishers have in 2024 is quite a huge difference. And so I feel like artist speed isn't quick enough to keep up, to be able to be like, oh yeah, this is what Boom does, this is what Dark Horse does. It's like, this is what Boom does in 2024, this is what Image did in 2020.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
You got to constantly be updating your notes. I mean, you're totally right. I just had Chip Zdarsky on the podcast, and we were talking about how it's 10 years of Sex Criminals. And you think about what the environment was like for Image in 2012 and 2013, when Saga was hitting and Wicked and Divine was hitting, and, Bitch Planet was hitting and Sex Criminals was hitting, versus like where it was in, like, let's say 2020. And then 1 year later, the world is completely different. 2021 is this crazy market for comics, and all of a sudden it's just like everything you do is gold. And then in 2024, there's like a lot of like consternation and a lot of fear and everything like that. And the situation for the industry as a whole and the situation for individual publishers dramatically shifts what the options are and what you can do. And you're right. You have to constantly be updating your notes, and you always have to be paying attention, and there's only so much you can do. So ride that wave, Jesse.
Let's see what I can do.
There's another interesting thing that's happened. I feel like it's more in these past 5 or sort of 6 years, or certainly during the duration that I've been putting comics out, where someone had asked me, a good friend of mine, David Hyde, who does publicity for comics, had asked me, like, oh, if I had put The Good Asian out now, do I think it would have had like the impact that it had and all that kind of stuff? And again, this was just like a year ago, right? Like that book just came out a year, maybe a year and a half ago. And I was just like, it's actually way further than that. I think every single book, I don't think Infidel would have had the impact it had if I'd done it now as opposed to I did it then. Like every book that I've done, it made a splash because it was timed very much for the time that it sort of came out. Like, I don't find that there are lessons that I can pull from one and sort of bring them to another, but I don't feel like I have a kit that they're like, oh, this is the thing. Take everything I learned from Infidel, bring it to Good Asian. Take everything I learned from Good Asian, sort of bring it to Man's Best. And I do feel like that is a little bit of the state of like the marketplace and the industry right now, where it reminds me of what people used to say about indie film, where it's just like, as soon as some person figures out how to break out and make a hit, everyone rushes to it. It cauterizes, and no one can do it that way anymore. You kind of have to move on to the next thing. It does sort of feel like things are so fractured or sort of chaotic. You're constantly looking for new ways to sort of like pierce through whatever the veil is of public interest and all that is. And I think it being on sort of the earlier side of my career and putting stuff as a writer, putting new stuff out, there's a luxury in that, being like, oh, I don't really know what it's like to kind of just chill and just like put out books and they'll buy them based on like my name. I always kind of have to like figure out, how am I going to market this book, and how do I do it so it maximizes where the market is right now and where the industry is right now. Anytime I'm launching a book, like I spend a lot of time reading Sketched and reading like all your like where the talking to the roundtables and all that kind of stuff. Now, because it does sort of feel like, especially these past few years, it's especially with the kind of books that I think that aren't like the big two books, where they're sort of non-genre. It's looking at what are the opportunities there are in the marketplace to sort of position what you're working on to people who kind of want it. And it's not that like these books are in development for so long. It's not like I'm writing anything to fill that space because the timeframes don't work out. It's just like I've got something, and then like, okay, what does this marketplace look like now, and how can I maximize what I have to sort of fit whatever the whatever direction the wind happens to be blowing at these particular times.
And I try to find people to work with who are like that, so I can just be myself and not worry about it. The artist gets to be the space cadet. I mean, it's just like, I'm just so tired. I've been drawing all day. Yeah.
The best thing, though, is you guys found the one thing that survives every marketplace: cute animals.
Yeah, the liquor store of tropes. Like it's recession-proof.
Yeah, throughout history, Homeward Bound came out in like 1990. John Wick came out in like 2014 or something like that. Doesn't matter. If there's a cute animal involved, cute animal in peril. Amazing approach to storytelling.
Yeah, there's been some misses, I think, in between those two.
Let's ignore the rest, Jesse. We're ignoring the rest.
The underdog movie, I don't think anyone is talking about that.
Even within that framework, though, I think it's super interesting. Like, if you look at, like, I think it is so cool that we're launching this book and a week later, Feral comes out, you know, which is like Tony Fleek's and Tricia Forrester's, like, not sequel, but follow up to Stray Dogs. You know, we announced this book the same month that Animal Pounds came out, and Marvel's got like been on a roll lately with like the It's Jeff comics, the Alligator Loki, like Marvel Meow. Like there's all these sort of like pet things, and it's a little bit of what I'm talking about, of just kind of like, oh, there's interesting things happening. I don't know where they're going. And I've gotten used to the fact that, that's just part of the fun of like putting out comics now, just figuring out how to analyze this wave and then try to surf it somehow.
Yeah. Well, I think you two are doing an amazing job of it, but that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about Man's Best, Jesse's greatness, Jesse's continued greatness on top of that, and everything else. I really appreciate you two taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really happy you made the time. This is my favorite podcast to listen to, and it's always great talking to you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Pornsak Pichetshote and artist Jesse Lonergan. You can find them in their work in the upcoming Man's Best from Boom Studios and them on Twitter and Instagram. Big thanks to Deanna Chapman for stepping in to edit this one. If it sounds better than usual, it's because of her. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel, and when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast, as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic or following me at @SliceRightGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including JKJ Art, Faith Aaron Hicks, Yeah Comics, Ben Rowe, Cameron Brown, Jonathan Breen, Danny Ollie, Charlie Stickney, Tom Drennan, Jeremy Thomas Burke, Jared Schwab, Scott Dunn, Chip Mosher, Alan Ellsworth, Seth Pomeroy, James McEwen, Andrew Lehman, Christina Merkler, Scott Place, Travis Gibb, Darcy Van Polgees, Travis Schmeiser, Tom Evans, Natalie Mockery, Reed Beeman, Kelly Sudaconic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian Hull, Chris Doré, Near Levy, Jason Hussa, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Jingo Boren, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Domstead, Rom V, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Orens, Capes and Tights Podcast, Claus Vandevent, Submit Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Power, Declan Shelby, Dan Garino, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, Liana Kingas, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Andrew Carita, Stephen Hall, Philip Myra, Chris Pachalo, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Ta, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Gibb, Sean Kirkham, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwand, Vita Ayala, Akil, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, David Kelly, Nick Polito, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Carl McMahon, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abbott, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Wolfpack for letting me use their song Outro as the show's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.